I was in the middle of finishing up some anime patches for my jacket, and I got kind of overwhelmed by the amount of colors I was using, so I decided to make some black and white manga patches instead. I generally try to not start a new project instead of finishing what I'm currently working on, but I did, and I filmed the process to share. First up is Choso from Jujutsu Kaisen. I lost most of the footage from this somehow, but I basically went in with 2 strands of black, white, and gray embroidery floss to fill in this design. I used mostly long and short stitches except on his face, where I used a back stitch for details and a satin stitch to fill. Next up is Aizawa from My Hero Academia. I traced the characters to create the designs and printed them out on water-soluble stabilizer with an adhesive backing. Here I'm adding Aizawa's design to the fabric and going in with 1 strand of embroidery floss to add in an outline. I like to do this first, or at least put down a few stitches all around the design to make sure that the water-soluble stabilizer does not shift while I'm sewing. I used long and short stitches to fill in most of this design, as well as a satin stitch for the face, hands, and scarf. Last up is Shikamaru from Naruto. I decided to go with a chain stitch for the outline just to make it look a bit interesting. There are actually a couple ways to do this stitch, but this was my favorite. Once that was done, I started filling in the design. Rather than starting with an outline, I ended up filling in each space and adding in the outline after, since there was so much white in this design. I think that helped keep it a lot neater. You can get away with a lot when you're using mostly black, which is why I added in the outline first for Choso and Aizawa, but normally I will fill before adding an outline. This is just a personal preference, and I definitely recommend doing what works best for you. I used mostly satin and long and short stitches to fill in this design. The hardest part of all these patches was definitely his hands, but I think they turned out really nice in the end. I went in with 1 strand of floss for the hands and used a satin stitch to fill. Overall, these were all pretty straightforward to finish, which was exactly what I was hoping for. Once I finished the embroideries and washed off the stabilizer, I cut some iron-on backing to size and ironed it onto the back of the fabric. I had then carefully cut out each patch, leaving space to add an edge. I personally like to leave the backing on while I add a whip stitch to the edge of my patches. I find that it keeps the edge a consistent thickness and it helps with any fraying of the fabric while you sew. This process can take a while, but it's pretty simple. You can do this stitch as tight or as loose as you like, but I prefer to have full coverage to protect the fabric underneath. These are the finished patches. They all came out pretty perfect and should take up a solid amount of space on my jacket. I've gotten a few questions about how long these take me, and I'd say each of these took between 8 and 12 hours. I also had a bunch of other patches that I finished over the past couple years and just never put on my jacket, mostly from anime. Here I'm just figuring out where I want to place them down before ironing and sewing. I'm just placing the patch down, covering it with cotton fabric, and ironing for a few seconds at a time. I let it cool before going in with some floss and add a very loose whip stitch to the edge. This is not necessary, but I always do it with my patches to make sure the edges lay flat. I'm going to make a more detailed video soon on how I add patches to my jacket, but that's all for this video. As always, thanks for watching and make sure to like and subscribe if you want to see more.